Welcome everybody to Bold Ideas. Today we have Ashim Sharma. My name is Mazen Hamadi. I'm the head of Stong College. And together with Calumet College, we work together to provide all student success programming for our students, our staff, our faculty, alumni, and fellows, not only about academic support, but also about transitioning students into university, mentoring them, about leadership development opportunities, and about career opportunities and community engagement workshops such as this one. I will proceed as such. I will read the land acknowledgement, then I will introduce Ash. I will read his bio sketch. We will go and then explain a little bit about, perhaps Ash or I can explain a little bit about housekeeping, and then we can proceed with this session. I will be now presenting and reading actually the land acknowledgement. This is a preamble for all Zoom meeting sessions. Welcome, as we are not all gathered in the same space. We recognize that this land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you are currently on. We ask that if this is the case, you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders. We recognize that many indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The significance of giving land acknowledgements is essentially showing recognition of and respect to indigenous peoples and their traditional or ancestral territories, which are essential elements of establishing healthy reciprocal relations. It is also the way forward in the steps toward reconciliation between indigenous and non-indigenous peoples. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Pump Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Today, our presenter is Ashim Sharma. Ash is undergoing and pursuing currently his honors Bachelor in Arts degree in Psychology and English. Also, Ash has been with Calumet and Stong College as a leadership coach for at least a year and a half to two. He is also an active bystander and a co-lead of the Gender Equity Collab, or GEL, within the Center for Sexual Violence Response, Support, and Education. Here is Ash's bio sketch. Ashim is currently completing his BA in Psychology and English at York University and is looking to pursue a master's in counseling. His current research interests revolve around masculinity and its effects on emotion regulation. He has been involved with the Faculty of Health at York University as a Calumet and Stong College's leadership coach since 2018, delivering leadership skills training to hundreds of students. He is also leading the GEL group within the Center for Sexual Violence Response, Support, and Education to engage male-identified or non-binary community members to work together towards ending gender-based violence and contributing to enhancing and supporting positive masculinity. Ashim is also supporting an Agents of Change project, Humans in Progress, to aid community leaders in recovering and reassessing their sense of purpose and their personal mission. At this point, before I allow Ash to move forward with sharing his experience, a couple of notes. Please keep your mics muted until the time when you have a question or comment you would like to share with everyone. Also, feel free to either turn your video on or off according to what you prefer. However, if you decide to ask a question in person using your mic, please turn the video on so we can see the person who's asking. You also have another option to ask a question by placing your question or comment in the chat function. If you would prefer that your question be asked anonymously, then you have the option to send a private chat either to Ash, to myself, to Agatha, or to Bailey. As you can see, Agatha Stipka has a star in front of her name, and she will be the backup personnel along with Bailey Tepperman, who will kindly add a star in front of her name so that everybody can easily identify her. Both of them will be the backup staff in case you would like to send them private messages about comments or questions. Or if somebody feels upset or distressed or triggered by what Ash will present today, since it is a very serious topic, please connect with either Agatha, Bailey, or myself in a private chat before you step away. We need to ensure that you are doing well. Ash, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mazen. I want to thank you as well as the Faculty of Health, Calumet and Stong colleges for giving me this opportunity. I also want to thank each and every one of you guys here for attending. Without further ado, I would like to jump into just waiting for my screen to share. So the title of this talk is Unmasking Failure, an intersectional view at mental health and masculinity. The music that you guys have heard leading up to this for the last 10 minutes or so, that was from a Toronto-based artist who goes by the name of Balu. He is also a South Asian immigrant living in Toronto, and his music does speak to me in terms of what it means to be, what it means to not have a direct home within Canada and be so distant from your own home. So if you guys are interested in checking out more of that music, I suggest you guys search up Balu on Spotify or Apple Music. But jumping into my talk, Mazen gave a great overview of myself. And just to sort of add a couple of things, I think it's important to mention that I am myself a second-generation Canadian. My parents did immigrate here, allowing me to have the life I have now. I'm also a first-generation student, which means no one before me in my lineage had gone to higher education. I am studying psychology and English at York University, and I'm also the oldest of 3 boys. I feel like these are all very important subjects to talk about, to contextualize myself within this talk. I do want to give a trigger warning again that some of the content will include issues on self-harm as well as suicide. So if you need to take some time to step away and then come back later on, please do so. Or if you would like to send Mazen or myself a message. Coming into this talk, I was asking myself what bold idea do I have, and what it is that I want to talk about. And unpacking things like the fears that come along with being not just a man, but a South Asian man within our society today. The concept of failure had touched upon me many, many times. I see myself failing in many aspects of my life, such as in my role as a son, as well as my role as a student and as a role as a partner. I want to jump into these topics as I go on, talk a little bit more about these as we go on. But once I would love to complete this talk with a passage from Pema Chodron, who is a Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist monk and teacher. So without further ado, I want to talk about my own failures as a son. And I do not think that we can conceptualize these failures until we go back in time to about me when I was about 10 years old. That is me in the bottom picture here. And talking about this was around the first time that I began accompanying my parents to doctor's offices, to numerous different priests, shamans, psychiatrists, pretty much everything under the sun, everything in the that you can think of. As 10 years old, I did not know what was going on. But as the oldest son, I was constantly told that it was up to me to hold things down, to make sure things don't fall apart. So it was definitely my responsibility to make sure that everything was going smoothly and that everyone was okay. But I had no idea what exactly was going on, what exactly was the problem. Until a few months of this passed by, a few months of trips over the weekends, going across city, across province, to wherever. Until a few months after that, I saw my mom being strapped to a stretcher and taken on to an ambulance. Still remember seeing the ambulance pull away as I'm sitting there at the third floor looking outside the window. The next time I saw my mom was in the psych ward. She was wearing the same gown as everyone else, and I did not recognize her at first. It was only until she had turned to me and smiled that I realized, okay, yes, this is my mother. After months, during this time, I was then told that she was ill, that she was sick, but I did not know of what illness or of what sickness. But I did know that I was supposed to take care of everyone, that I was supposed to be there to hold everything together. So getting back home, seeing my brothers, I knew that this was my role as the oldest son. Months went by, a couple months went by, and my mom finally comes home. Luckily, we were reunited. And through this time, I did take it upon myself to make sure that nothing falls apart, that everything is okay, that I do everything in my power to make sure that nothing like this happens again. And it worked well for quite some time. It did, for actually quite a few years. We did have some chance encounters and other misfortunes, but for the most part, we were doing good. We were happy, we were loving, and we were living. Fast forward a few years, about 7 years, near the time of my first year in university. During this is a time where things really started to fall apart. I was in these nights where I found myself wrestling away a knife from my mother. I found myself pulling her off a ledge the next day. And after countless visits to a psychiatrist and psychologist and doctors, we were awoken to one day finding a bloody woman unresponsive on the kitchen floor. Luckily, she survived. But I know there are many people that do not survive this or cannot. We're lucky enough to be at that point where I was able to sit by her bedside and know that she's going to be okay. Sit by her hospital bed and know that she's going to be okay. However lucky that is, I do consider that one of my lowest points. Because in the larger context, I did fail as a son. I failed to protect my family. I failed to protect my mother. And I failed to make sure that everything is not falling apart. Now, I may understand what many of you may think that, of course, there's not much that I could have done in this circumstance, and I did the best I could. But to understand this, we must take a look at the messages I've been receiving as a child. Some of the messages, like it was up to me to make sure that everything goes right, to me to make sure that my family is okay, that my family is healthy, and that my family is alive. It was up to me as the oldest son to make sure that all these things were under my control. And when I lost control, that in itself was my failure as a son. Coming out of this, I could also see my failures as a student. Because once I started to take more control, once I started to go all in to make sure that my family was happy and healthy, I began to see my school suffer, my classes suffer, and my grades suffer. Now, looking back to middle school and high school, I was always an honor roll student. I was always a good enough student. Never a great student, never an amazing student, but I made it work. I held it together. I made sure nothing fell apart when it came to my grades and my future. That was, however, until my first year of university, where, like I'm sure many of you have already experienced yourselves, university is a different kind of challenge. I was not prepared for this challenge, let alone ready to take it on. But I took it on, and I began to see those grades slip away. And I remember thinking to myself, still having belief in myself and still having hope in myself, after midterms, after a few months had gone by, that I could still make it happen. I could still make it happen. I could still save my grades. Now, many of you may resonate with this, but hope only lasts as long as until the grade report shows up. And for me, that grade report was, other than a couple of C's, a bunch of D's and F's. Well, a few months after my final grade report, my first year, I received this letter in the mail. It was an academic probation letter. And it was after receiving this letter that I knew that something had to be changed. Now, as a student, but not just as a student, as a South Asian man, I am always considering myself to be on top of my academics. Now, I found myself at a point where I could not even ask for help because I was that embarrassed. It was until I received this letter that I found myself sitting in the office of the Student Academic Services with this letter in my hand, asking for help with a counselor to see what I can do to fix this. Now, I would love to say that this was my lowest point, or this was the turning point. I would love to say that this was a point where everything fixed itself, magically fixed itself, but as we all know, that is not how things usually work out. Because what I did not realize was my shortcomings were not simply because of academics, but it was also because of my own mental health. In the months following, I found myself struggling even more, not because I couldn't understand, but because I was dealing with a mental illness that I did not even accept within myself. If any of you guys have suffered through a mental illness, you may know that it is sometimes often difficult to accept the fact of what is. Because as a South Asian man, I am not to get sick, I am not to get ill. I am to hold it all together, and I'm to make sure that everything goes smoothly. So for me, that mental illness was a failure. But what was even more of a failure was not seeking help. Until one day I found myself in a 5 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in the front seat of my car looking at a giant neon sign that says "Fit for Less, open." It was in that moment where all the thoughts of just ending it, of I could not handle it no more, all the thoughts of I don't deserve it started coming up. That was my lowest point. That was the darkness the deep dark abyss that I was in. Now, luckily, I had the previous failure as a son to teach me that mental illness is no joke. I had the experiences to teach me that some of the things that I've gone through, seeing my mom in the hospital bed, I wanted nobody else to go through. Because of these experiences, that instead of doing something that I would regret, I sought help. I finally sought help for my mental illness. Things were beginning to look up. Grades were solving themselves. I was getting more involved, and my relationship with my family improved. My relationship with my friends improved. But of course, low points always come. They will always be there. And I found myself in a low point as a partner. Now, my low point here was not during the relationship. It was actually months after the relationship had ended. I found myself on my bed writing a letter to this person, knowing that she would never read this letter. And within that letter, simply thanking her for everything she gave me, everything she showed me, and everything she taught me. Because I was lucky enough at the age of 20 to have someone teach me and have someone show me how to love unconditionally, how to support someone regardless, and how to forgive with an open heart. I was lucky enough to have someone show me what it meant to love at the age of 20. However, this concept of love was always alien to me. This concept of love was always a scary subject because I had seen myself as a conglomerate of all my past failures. So thus it was inevitable for me to be a failure as a partner as well. Thus it was inevitable for that relationship to end, for the love to end. So I ended it. And my low point here was not ending it, but rather not seeing what I had when I hadn't. And I understand you could call this stupidity, ignorance, or call me too dumb or too young. But the truth was I was too scared. I was too scared to let myself be loved. I was too scared to consider myself as worthy of being loved. Now, usually when I have these conversations with my friends or with myself, a question always arises. Do I have any regrets? If I could do it all over again, what would I do differently? And I understand I've failed at many things. And I've thought about all the possible circumstances, whether if I could go back in time and change something, how would I make sure that I do not fail? But I always end up coming back to one resolution. I think my biggest regret here is not failing. But my biggest regret is not sitting with my failure long enough to learn from them. It's not sitting with my failures long enough to take away all the lessons that I could have. I regret mostly not being comfortable enough with my failures and my flaws to speak about them and to share them. And so as I'm sharing this with you all today, I'm hoping that I'm getting more comfortable with my failures. And I would suggest for you all to also be comfortable with your failures. Because although the redemption story is the story we usually chase the success. It is not possible to redeem oneself without failing first. It is literally within the definition. You cannot get back up without falling down first. You cannot succeed without failing first. And instead of looking away from your failures and trying to hide our failures and our flaws, I suggest that we embrace those. We look to our failures. We become more comfortable sitting at that low point. Become more comfortable sitting beside that hospital bed, sitting in that car in front of the fifth sitting on the bed writing that letter. I suggest we become more comfortable with failure as a society, as a group. Now, I want to end this off by reading a passage from Pema Chodron's best-selling book, When Things Fall Apart. And when I think about this passage, I think about not just when things fell apart for me, but also when things fall apart in the world. When things fall apart around the world, whether it be mass violence, prejudice, incarcerations, or a pandemic sweeping the world. When we think about when things fall apart, I think about this passage right here. Excuse me. Things falling apart is a kind of testing and also a kind of healing. We think that the point is to pass the test or to overcome the problem. But the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and they fall apart. Then they come together again and they fall apart again. It's just like that. And the healing comes from letting there be room for all of this to happen. Room for grief, room for relief, room for misery, and room for joy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ash. This must not be very easy for you to share with us. I will use my prerogative as a moderator and ask you the first question. You are extremely busy. You are very engaged in the community that you live in. You do multiple things. You have been with the Calumet and Stong colleges helping with the leadership development, exploration, and development program for the last 2 years. You have helped train hundreds of students. You have involved yourself with the Center for Sexual Violence Response, Support and Education. And you are also leading student clubs on level of masculinity, and you're engaged with Humans in Progress project through the Agents of Change. Tell me, what is your perspective today when comparing what you do now with that particular person who existed a few years ago when all this happened? Do you feel it is you, or do you feel it's a totally different world, totally different person that you're looking at when you look back at the past?
You know, it's very easy to kind of see what I'm doing now and relate that to what I'm doing what I was doing, or the lack of what I was doing in the past. And when we do this, it's sort of holding up a comparison to ourselves. But that comparison usually lacks a deeper sentiment where, yes, my actions today and my involvement today may be very different than my actions and involvements a few years ago. However, I still find myself failing the same way. I still find myself struggling in a very similar way. Sort of to put this in context of my time right now, I had 2 work meetings this week, both of which I had shown up too late. Now, a few years ago, that was me on a regular basis, struggling with showing up on time to any meeting, to any representation. And some of my friends here could speak on that as well. A few years ago, that was a large struggle of mine as well. And I find these struggles being very evident, and these failures coming up time and time again. And it's not the fact that these failures come up, it's the fact that how I will handle these and how I will respond to these failures. I hope that answers your question.
You refer to them as failures. I personally may have a different perspective on that. Do you still today look back at them and consider them failures? Do you not see them as learned lessons?
I think it's sort of a reclamation of who I was. At the moment, those are not learned lessons. The moment, those are failures. And if I am to go about ignoring what it is and trying to rename it or restate it, I am also taking away much of what made that a lesson.
Ash, I admire your courage. We want more citizens like you who turn their experiences into a work of accomplishment and productivity and help the community. We have a comment and a question in the chat. The comment is, thank you so much for speaking today. The work you're doing is really wonderful and vital. I appreciate you sharing your story and growth. I understand the struggle. It's beautiful that you're speaking about them. Thanks again. Another comment. Thank you all. I want to know who is the most helpful person for Ashim? Parents, friends, or mentor?
Who is the most helpful person? That's a very good question. I don't think I could narrow it down to one person. And I find as the years go by, it usually changes. It usually takes on different, usually these forms of mentorship is taken on by different people as the years go by, and as the years go by, different people also change. Where years ago, I could see many of my friends that I put myself around as being mentors. Some of my, even my parents themselves as being mentors to me when it comes to living unapologetically and loving unapologetically and dealing with failure, how they deal with it, they will for sure be my mentors. But as the years go by, as I start searching for different things, start searching for different answers, all of a sudden now, I would have Agatha as a mentor. I have Mazin as a mentor. And I would not be, I'll be remiss if I say as the future comes, I could not find other mentors or other lessons. But I have appreciated every single person who has come in my life, every single person who has taught me something new or something different.
Thank you, Ash, for this wonderful interaction. We have one question in the chat. Would you happen to know some of the lesser known stats on mental illness in men? The conversation often revolves around women, and I think we need to address the stereotypes about mental health in women versus men.
Thank you so much for that question. When it comes to direct statistics, I cannot quote some off my head, but from the statistics that I've been learning from, things like suicide and feeling like you can't ask for help are definitely larger in the male perspective than with the masculine population than with the feminine population, compared to things like schizophrenia, which is oftentimes represented in a larger female population.
Thank you, Ash. We have a question from Rahan who would like to ask you the question directly. Rahan, please go ahead.
I just want to do a quick audio check. Can you hear me? Awesome. I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story. You know, I found it to be very inspiring, especially the resilience and the, overcoming that failure and really even embracing our past, uh, failures, things that often we're not even responsible for, we do feel responsible for. And that is the question I'd like to ask to you. You mentioned in your story that because of the sort of the cultural tropes and you sort of being like the quote unquote man of the house sometimes, that like you're like the older person, that you had to hold it together, and you spoke about the pressure that put on you. I wonder what advice you have for people who are experiencing that and people who are just experiencing adversity in general. Thank you.
That's a great question, Ryan. That's a question I oftentimes ask others. This may have been the first time that question has been asked to myself. But if I'm to speak from my own experiences and speak rather than experiences of others, I would I would advise everyone, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, to to take a different look at or a different perspective at why you are doing certain things. Sort of take a look at what are the pressures and sort of reevaluate your boundaries and your values. Although for myself, it was easy to say that it is a cultural trope put on me. It is expectations put on me externally. It was also up to myself to break down those cultural expectations, break down those barriers, and break down uh, those expectations to really ask why. To really ask why am I expected to have all this, to take care of all this? And even if I agree with the answer of why, I must then look at the people around me. How is everyone around me there to help me? So I think regardless of how we feel pressure or don't feel pressure, people around us, people closest to us, have been a great asset for me, myself personally, to increase that resilience, to sort of renegotiate what failure looks like for myself.
I just had a quick follow up, and you mentioned the resources around us, and I really agree that utilizing the resources around us can be so beneficial. I remember in your presentation you were talking about how you got the letter, and you had shown up to the guidance office to speak with a guidance counselor on this. I see a lot of people, even including myself, who often due to certain tropes, we feel and certain stereotypes, we feel that we can't ask for help. What advice or what how would you motivate someone who is clearly in need of help, but they themselves, because of some internalized notions that they have, they feel that they don't want to ask for help and they feel they want to do it all on their own?
Mm. You know what? That is so difficult because one part of asking for help is admitting that we have ourselves failed to do it ourselves. I even to this day find it difficult to really ask for help. Anytime one can once again speak on this, it wasn't until she had mentioned multiple times that she is able to assist me on some of the work and provide some resources for me that I was able to say, okay, yes, I need help. It took me a while to even now admit that I need help. So I feel for anyone that is struggling with accepting the fact that they may need help because it's not just accepting you need help, but it's also accepting that we have failed in the work that we have done, that we are failing still. So I think when it comes to this, a lot of it involves our own growth. And when we look at reframing our expectations and reframing uh, what we are meant to do, a lot of this can also involve reframing how we see failure. Reframing seeing failure as just a negative rather than a necessary part of life. Similar to what Shodran's passage had said, failure happens. I think it's the acceptance of failure that helps us sit with it and learn with it and ask for help easier. That really puts us in a better position compared to trying to do it, just trying to do it, just trying to do it, trying to fix it, trying to hold things together.
Thank you so much for answering my questions, Ash. And I just want to say, I'm really inspired by you sharing your story. Thank you so much for doing that and adding value to all of us here today. And myself and other people on this call, we're really looking forward to the great impact that you're going to have, not just in our college community at Calumet and Stong, but also through the SVRO. So thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the great questions, Ryan.
Thank you, Rahan and Ash. Ash, we have a couple of questions. Let me read them. Ash, thanks for sharing your story, bro. If you don't mind sharing, what are some of the techniques or strategies you use to get comfortable with failure?
That was the first time I heard Mazen say bro. I would pay to hear that again. Some strategies.
It's recorded.
Some strategies on being comfortable with failure. It's like I've said, it's always some techniques. It's never a comfortable thing. It's never going to be an easy thing. I know as I move forward in anything I try, I know I will fail again. But I know if it's going to be worth doing, I will continue doing it. And if I hold this perspective of, yes, it's going to happen, it's inevitable, because it is at the end of the day. Hold that perspective and and start moving on in that way. I think that made it a lot easier for me to deal with some of my failures, to become comfortable with my failures. However, even now, I still find myself itching to solve the failure as fast as I can, rather than understanding what the failure is really telling me, rather than really unpacking that failure. I would like to give an example of within the Humans in Progress initiative that I'm helping put on. I was to create a full-on training, a 2-hour training to be put on in the next couple of weeks. Coming into that, I'd recognize that that training was not to par. However, I was scared to admit it. I was scared to admit that I failed, scared to admit that I may need more time, scared to ask for help. So it is still something that I'm struggling with myself. And I still frantically run and frantically move around to try to solve these problems, to try to solve these failures. But I found that if I give myself some time to step back and be okay with the failure, it loosens a lot of pressure on myself. It allows me to come up with better solutions in the near future. And it allows me to see what's really driving me. And when I do that, I can see that it's not the fear of failure that stops me from failing, or the fear of failure that takes me away from it. But rather what drives me is my purpose, to always grow and to always continue healing. So if you're looking for some strategies, I would look at reading the book that I just read from, When Things Fall Apart. I would look at meditation as a tool to stop the world around you, stop the world moving around you, and just be in your own your own time and your own space. I would suggest ways of being more comfortable with failure. I would suggest just failing, just letting yourself fail at something small and seeing what happens. Maybe it's cooking. I cannot tell you the number of times I have burnt toast, the easiest thing to cook, and I messed it up. Whatever it is, I suggest looking forward to a failure whenever you have a chance to.
Thank you, Ash. We have a few comments here. I will read them and then I will ask the audience if they have more questions before I ask mine. Comment here. Thank you for sharing your story and your perspective. A great strategy is to also be in room spaces like this one where people share their stories of failure, the lessons they've learned, and how their journeys have led them to reorient their perspectives surrounding failure. Now I'm calling on the attendees to go ahead and ask Ash questions or share their perspective and comments. I will wait 10 to 15 seconds for anyone to proceed.
I have
Hello,
a
Ash.
question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, you go.
Okay. Thank you, Ash, for sharing and your courage. And I want to echo what I think Rahin and Mazin said, that you're certainly an inspiration. And I'm very grateful that you're my colleague because I have learned a lot from you. I want to ask a question from sort of someone who works at the institution and works at York University. And sometimes I think that potentially systems or institution also may fail people or may fail students. So when you received that letter from the Faculty of Health, is there anything that we could have done differently? Or is there anything as a staff member, as someone who works within York, to better support you? Because I don't necessarily see it as you're failing, but it could have been, we could have done something differently.
Thank you for that question. See, that's the thing about failure. It's never about one person, although oftentimes we see it that way. And my failures were never just because of me, even my lone failures. But in this circumstance, if I would say that it could have been something done better, what had happened was, to give you guys a breakdown of the whole situation, was after receiving that letter, I was advised to visit the Office for Student Academic Services. Upon visiting, I was sat down with a counselor that I worked there and mapped out ways to move forward, to move on, to solve. Instead of recognizing what it was that caused the failure or seeing failure as an inevitable part, it was very much focused as, okay, how do we turn you into a success story, away from the story of a failed student. And essentially that was, to me, how do I stop becoming myself? Because at the moment I was a failed student. I didn't want to change. I just wanted to change the marks that I was getting, the effort I was putting into it. And when we looked at ways to adjust the first, I feel like we're limiting ourselves to repeat some of the mistakes that we've already made, rather than learn from them and move forward.
Thank you, Ash. Kareem, I assume you had a question, correct?
Yes, I just want to say some comments. Thank you, Ash, for your sharing. This is my first time to join this event. I want to say, as a student in York University, um, the curriculum is really a big pressure for us. So it's normal uh, to have some issues. Frankly speaking, when we are a child, we learn, we try to do something really hard, but always fail. So it doesn't matter. I'm a MBA student in Schulich. I think this will be very hard, in the coming semester, all the online courses and everything. I just say it's better to take some time to zoom out, and maybe after, and we refresh my mind, and we can figure out the new solution. That's just I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Kareem. Ash, we have a couple of comments and a question in the chat. The comment is, thank you for sharing. It was wonderful to hear your story, Ash. We have a question. Don't you think you're putting too much energy and time to solve your failures? Wouldn't it be better to learn from them and move on? They are part of the past. They are lessons to learn from. How you have evolved and become today is by itself the solution to your failures.
That's a wonderful question. Don't I think that I'm putting too much energy and time to solve my failures? Oftentimes, the easier thing to do may not be the right thing to do. The reason I'm here is not because I failed and then succeeded. The reason I wanted to share is because I failed, succeeded, and then continued failing, and then continued succeeding. It is not easy to say that I can simply learn from every single mistake that I've made, because I've made a lot. But what I can do and what I've found to help myself is to decrease the pressure of failure, making it okay for myself to fail, for myself to show up 10 minutes late for a meeting, for myself to drop the ball on a presentation, for myself to come in a bold ideas talk and not hit it out the park as I wanted to. And as I do that, the only way I can do that is if I'm able to sit with my failures. And when I do that, the lessons that I'm getting from them are not necessarily lessons on how to solve the failure. They rather range from lessons of what's really important to me. Oftentimes, there was a time where I failed at working at Lowe's. I was unloading a truck in the back. That was my job from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. I would do that while coming to school. Now, saying that was a tough job is an understatement, but I did that because I needed the money to move on. The reason I failed at that was because no longer was money a priority for me. What was a greater priority was my own health, my own mental health, and my grades essentially. And it didn't come until I was able to sit with the question of why do I feel like I'm failing? Even though every day I'd come in and I'd unload an entire truck, still felt like I was failing as a person. So after sitting with myself and sitting with that thought, I was able to really unpack what it was that was important to me. And the thing about failures and solution is that oftentimes when we think about our failures, we go directly into the solution or into the lesson. And we avoid things like, what are the important parts? We avoid things like, what are our boundaries? What are some of our values that may have been expressed or constrained during that time? I could have said, maybe in that job, maybe if I talk to a manager and I ask them to transfer over to a different position or ask for another hand to help me out, perhaps that would have helped me succeed. But that wasn't the success I was looking for. And I hope that answers your question of putting energy into dealing with our, putting energy and time into sitting with our failures.
Thank you, Ash. Do we have more questions from the attendees? I know there are expressions of love and appreciation that are being expressed in the chat. Do we have more questions? Ash, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, if you don't mind, until maybe the attendees will have more questions. You have two younger brothers. Having gone what you've gone through, what advice would you provide them at this moment in life, knowing what you know?
This is a question I struggle with on a daily basis. With my relationship with my brothers, it often happens that I set out to give them this advice, but it is not always given in the way that I've expected or received, the way that I've expected. What I found that instead of holding my brothers to an expectation of getting everything right and learning from my lessons without learning from my failures without making failures of your own, I find that to be quite contradictory to how I wanted to live my life. And so it was actually a few months ago, not too long ago, that I've stopped giving advice to my brothers. But if you were to say that if there's one thing that I would want them to know, I think it would be simply that I love them and I'm here for them. And I could say the same thing about any of my friends, any of the people that I've been around, anyone who's inspired me, and really anyone in my life.
Thank you again, Ash. This is very inspiring. Ash, you obviously are loved and protected and cared for, and you are an inspiration. You have inspired many, many, many in the past, and I am certain you will inspire more going forward. Each one of us has different concepts or perspectives or notions of success. If you ask our parents, they have different notions of success for every one of us, and yet probably a significant number of them do not think that their children succeeded because they didn't fit a specific or a particular image of success they have carried forth for so many years. Do you feel that you have constructed your own notion of success in the last few years to be able to extricate yourself from others' perspectives of success?
We live in a world and we're all constantly impacted by others, so that in itself and constantly influenced by others. So that in itself, is very difficult to even think about what does success to me look like. And I think I still have not defined it for myself. I know what my parents want me to do. I know what my friends may want me to do, what different people in my life may want me to do. I think I know what I want to do. But in this journey, I think that is my next step. After, there's this question that always sticks to my mind that I always ask myself whenever I'm taking something on. If I could not fail, what would I be doing right now? If failure does not exist, what would I be doing right now? And in unpacking that question and defining that question for myself, I'm able to see success in different lights, many different lights. I still do not know, however, which light is my light, which light is the one that I'm supposed to follow.
Wow, this is very powerful, Ash. We have a comment about the book that was recommended by one attendees, which is entitled Mindset by Carol Dweck. And Rahin said it's a great book. She does a great job of making cognitive behavioral therapy insights accessible to the general public. Ash, Rahin, is there anything else you'd like to comment on regarding this book, or maybe the attendee himself or herself before we move on?
Sorry, Ryan, we're unable to hear you.
Rahin, we cannot.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. I would like to take a moment to comment on this book and sort of related to the experience we're having. You know, lots of people, such as myself and Ash, we've benefited from the support, whether it's psychological support, mental health support, and we've had access, you know, to people who are there to provide us support. But books like Mindset, for example, can be a valuable resource to those who might not have those same resources in their community. Whether that's access to therapy, access to friends, family members, mentors, people to support us. So I just wanted to say that, you know, for those of you who might be, you know, struggling or just might want to sort of see if you can sort of modify your mindset and your perspective on some issues, I would totally recommend this book. And once again, thank you to Ash and thank you to the attendee who recommended that.
Thank you, Rahin. Are there any other questions or comments attendees would like to share with Ash? Ash, before we end, I will give you the last word. Is there anything else you would like to add? Any advice or recommendations? Any guidance? Any thoughts? Anything you would like to share with us before we end this wonderful session?
I would, and I would like to share a quote with you all. And I do not recall who said this quote, but it was on the lines of, as we're talking about success and failure, things of what to do, questions of what to do and how to move forward. I cannot recall who said this. The quote goes, we will not be given a dream that we do not have the capacity to complete. I think when we are talking about concepts of failures, concepts of success, I think the notion of purpose has a large part to play in this. And if we're able to dream it, to conceptualize it, I have no concern that any person has a capacity to complete any dream that they have. Thank you very much.
Very much for this. If there is no other, any additional comments or feedback or questions, then I would like to thank everyone for attending today's session. Please keep on providing feedback and comment in the chat. We will stay on Zoom for a short period of time after we stop recording this session. So please feel free to stay and have a conversation with Ash without being recorded. Again, Ash, thank you very much for opening up and addressing a very important and a rich topic that has influenced your path in life and made you who you are today. And thank you all for those who attended and shared their thoughts and asked questions. Have a nice evening, and please keep up with our events by linking to our Facebook or Instagram for Stong College at York University or Calumet College at York University. Thank you.